And welcome to the next edition of ReGen Ag Chat. My name's Genever.
And I'm Nic Renison.
So this is number 2 of a series of chats that we're doing with people, more on the food, health, how do we get regen food systems sort of to have a bigger impact. So we're talking to Sally in a moment. What did you get? What was the main thing you took from the conversation, Nic?
I really enjoyed this chat. I'm sorry for everyone if I have indulged too much in menopause chat, if there's any men cringing, but it affects 50% of the population. But what did I get? I got from Sally that you've got to do what you can and don't be too my danger is I go a bit fanatical about things. I think I'm going to cut this out. She just said, do what you can. So just try and make good choices when you can and fill up on veg and fruit and good meat. The other thing that I took from it was that her family own a hotel and restaurant business near Birmingham, and they're trying to source meat from producers that is produced the right way, and veg and stuff. And there's loads of product out there on farms like we do here and you do this at home. It's the distribution and it's how you get that, whether it's half a cow or a load of chickens or a load of, beetroot. It's how you get that from farms into restaurants. And it's that middle bit which is tricky. So, and she's trying to work around it, and it's really difficult to make happen. I don't know how we work on that.
Well, it was the guy, Anthony, who I was on this panel with a few weeks ago. He's in as an investor, and he's interested in developing that sort of system where producers could load their supply onto a network, and then wholesalers or restaurants or whatever can see, because some of it is the scale piece, isn't it? Like you might have 15 sirloin steaks in your fridge, but actually they need 200. So some of it is about a scale thing. But it's the transparency even of it all would be interesting.
But I think to get the system up and running, I think it probably needs a bit of funding, government help to, I don't know, trial a system because it's not simple.
See, for me, this is where the private sector fits, because it's so commercial, and the technology exists. Really, it's just about applying it onto this sector, isn't it? So
yeah, it is annoying when you've got someone like her who's obviously their business is shifting a lot of produce, but she can't get the produce she wants. It's not. It's got to be straightforward, and it's not. But what did you take from the chat?
You may pick up on my slight, frustration that she's currently lifting more than me in the weightlifting division. So in my defence, I've only just started to go back to weightlifting in the last month, and yeah, she's currently lifting more than I am, and I'm a little heavier than she is. That's irritating, but my time will come. Once I get past that, and every time I now go deadlifting, I think of what I'd now. It's highly motivational, so that's useful.
It's not a competition, Liz. It's not a competition.
But it sort of is in the world of weightlifting, isn't it? And importantly, I'm doing it. I find it quite meditative, and I also try and improve my back. Really is why I do it, and just to basically just people watch at a gym because it's highly entertaining.
But does it get rid of some anger or frustration? No.
I really enjoy it. Yeah, I do. It is good. I do sometimes. The frustration comes when you see loads of people moving stuff, and I'm like, if you were on a farm, we could do loads of jobs. So people spend hours of their time spending money to do things, and actually we need to set them on some jobs.
Well, randomly, there's a chap up in Scotland who you probably know, a farmer who set up a gym on his farm.
I don't.
And he's doing just that. He's like, they're moving big tires in the yard, and yeah, no, and it's going really well for him. I'm going to find what. Carry on. And
Health and safety nightmare. And then the other thing I took from her was this, I know we use the word holistic quite a lot, but this idea that food's important, but so is getting outside, exercise, connecting with nature, thinking about breathing. So, you know, all the stuff that I sporadically think about when I've read another thing, but actually, how do you put it all together and have the discipline of doing it every day? So so she's done a lot about this more holistic view of health rather than just sucking pills at people.
Mm. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but Fitness Farmyard.
Thank you.
It's the farm up in Scotland. But if you're listening to this, thinking, Dr. Sally Bell, what is she? How can that relate to regen farming? It'll be a little bit like the David Unwin podcast, and it relates perfectly well to regen farming. It's a really good listen.
So again, rate us highly. Tell your friends. On that note, we'll hand over to Uslot and Sally. Thank you. So we are talking to Dr. Sally Bell. She is a medical doctor specialising in lifestyle medicine and women's health. She advises organisations on wellness and speaks regularly on BBC Radio, and designs and runs wellness retreats. She is connected with the regenerative food and farming movement here in the UK and firmly believes human health is linked to our connection and care of our landscape and ecosystems. Her approach has moved away from treating diseases and managing symptoms to focusing on the person. It draws on the foundations that underpin health, nutrition, sleep, rest, movement, breath, and connection to self, others, and nature. It understands how our mind, body, and emotions are integrated. So we know Sally, or we've been connected to Sally through Marion Boswell, the legend that I did the Crate course with, and also that she came to Carbon Calling this year. So welcome, Sally.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Sally, we're so looking forward to speaking to you. I am in the middle of menopause. Liz doesn't really talk about her menopause
already.
But when I pack eggs and I listen to lots of podcasts about microbiome, sleep, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to this. So can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'm based in Nottingham. I'm an HSGP, as well as the other things you've mentioned. I've got 3 teenage girls. I am also in the throes of perimenopause. So I'm with you there, grappling with the challenges. And I really love being outdoors, nature. I think too much about existential things and get myself my knickers in a twist a lot. And I love weightlifting. So there we go.
Me too. Do you like deadlifting? That's my favourite.
Yeah. Deadlifting, yeah.
And how much can you lift? What kilo? What?
So I weigh 76 kilos and I can deadlift 90, I can bench 55, and I can squat about 60 at the moment. So yeah.
Oh my word.
But those aren't like single lifts, they're like sets of. So yeah, and I've given away my weight.
I'm just getting back into it after I had about 2 months off, so I'm not back on form yet. So no. Neither my weight nor the weights I can lift.
Yeah. One of the big things with perimenopause is how much muscle you've got, especially going into that second half of life. The more muscle you've got, the longer you live. So get lifting.
So you're all about health and prolonging our health and living better for longer.
Yes.
Not having years of endless drug treatments just to kind of keep us alive. But what the food we eat, how much is the way we're kind of all falling apart related to the food we eat?
I think so. The food that we're eating is killing us. You know, if we were to just simply start eating real food, we would change the health of our nation overnight, without a doubt. It's one of the critical things. But you do always have to remember that it's within the context of, getting a good night's sleep, moving, staying connected with family, friends, purpose, and yourself. It is about, really relentlessly managing our stress. And so I just think sometimes the nutrition piece is very emotive and provokes a lot of emotion, and can be very, very confusing, the messages. I don't think they have to be confusing. And I think depending on your audience, it's really interesting about where you start the conversation. So, before we hopped onto the call, we were talking about people who just haven't connected to the fact that food impacts health, right through to I've got people who want to go gluten-free and dairy-free and cut everything out and everything's organic. And so this spectrum that you have around this discussion, and then a massive issue around access to food, people's ability to still celebrate their culture, the ability to cook. Like it's a complex discussion to be had. But without a doubt, we are eating nearly 60% of our calories are ultra processed. And it's really important to understand what ultra processed food is. And that is the thing that is killing us, that regardless of whether you want to be a high fat, low carb, vegan, meat eater, we all agree that ultra processed food is the problem. My dogs are just going to have to let them in. Sorry. Real life, 3 children, 2 dogs, 3 cats. So yes, and I think the key message that we need as a nation is what is real food, and we just need to shift away from ultra processed food and start eating real food, and it will revolutionize our health, it will revolutionize our communities, and revolutionize the health of the landscape as well.
So I'm just thinking about, so say you have a beef sandwich. So the beef can be, whole food, but the sandwich is really difficult unless you live in a swanky place where there's lots of great little bakeries to buy good bread. And I guess that's the danger now, that supermarkets are full of, there's lots of choices that are being taken away from us, isn't there? So if you eat, say, a white sliced or even a brown sliced loaf with your sandwich is made of that, is that really bad?
I think there's no bad, there's no good. It's within context. Like at the moment, as I've said, nearly 60% of our calories are ultra processed. And just to pause for a moment to help people understand what ultra processed is so back in 2008, a group of scientists got together in Brazil and created something called the NOVA category. Don't have to remember any of all this, but they put food into 4 categories. So food that comes off the land is the first category, as it comes off the land. Second are kind of your condiments, so your oils, your vinegars that you'd use. Third is processed food, and everything is processed. We roast our coffee, we chop our onions, and then there's ultra processed, and they use 2 sort of definitions there. One, would you have the equivalent ingredient in a domestic kitchen? Are you opening your cupboard and adding, E467 and citric acid? And, so is this an ingredient you recognise? And that's actually the only clue for us as consumers, because we can flip over a packet and think, do I recognise, these ingredients? Would, I have these in the cupboard, or my friend who cooks, would she have these things, he or she have these things in the cupboard? The other bit is, the ultra process, it's been through lots of processes, so it looks nothing like the original, state of the food. But we don't know about that unless you're a real geek like me, when you're constantly thinking about food and researching these things. So the thing is you look at somewhere like Portugal, where something like 27% of their food is ultra processed. They have a completely different profile with chronic diseases in their nation. And so it's not always, is this good or is this bad? It's looking at the context of our diet, and wherever we can choose, to eat some real food that we understand the ingredients of, we choose that. Now, if you've got a hungry child that you can't fill up and all you've got access to is white sliced bread, then the misery of of them not being able to eat and going to bed hungry is going to do far more trauma than later in life when maybe they can access, better food. So it's so emotive. So yes, I would consider all supermarket bread pretty much on the shelves as ultra processed. It has a whole host of ingredients in it that I've never heard of, and well, I've heard of, but most people wouldn't have heard of, and they won't have in their kitchen. Your bread should be, flour, water, some yeast, bit of salt. So is it the wrong decision? No, but if you're always eating just ultra processed bread, and ultra processed foods, then it is a problem. And if we can just start shifting day after day of just adding a little bit of real food to our diet, it will transform our health over time. So it's about those small decisions. Shove a bit of broccoli on the side of the plate for your children. When you can access real bread, fantastic. Just getting back to some real food is the critical message. We don't have to make it confusing.
For me, it's also recognizing that I consider myself in a position of privilege because I've got a freezer full of meat that I've produced. I choose to buy organic fruit and veg from Riverford. So I've engaged in it, but that it's not accessible to all, is it? Like I probably haven't bought meat from a supermarket for about 5 years. And that also isn't real life for most people.
It's not, but it might be for some people. So it depends where the conversation is. If you've got somebody that is just eating lots of ultra processed food, starting that process of just talking about real food and where they can access it. But then if I've got people who actually can afford that, they have no idea of the impact of pesticides on human health. They don't realise that, how things are grown changes the nutrient density of it. They don't understand that eating that sort of diverse organic food impacts gut microbiome, but they could afford to it. Those are the people that can step up into that. There are plenty of people that have enough income to do that. So it's different conversations. It's all about real food, but it's about that journey of it. And so, yes, I think those of us that can afford it or want to make it a priority, we should be, purchasing these things so that there is the demand, so then farmers can respond to that and farm differently. And one of my loves in my work, I do a lot of corporate work, with lots of leaders, and the number of times where I have these light bulb moments with them when they're like, oh, what do you mean? Like all our food is industrially grown, and they have no idea. They've never thought about it and thought about the impact on the health of themselves and the health of their children. And they want to have that opportunity. They've just not had that conversation. So we need to have all of these conversations going on at the same time. And that's why, I always believe in personalized health. Like there's no one size fits all with that kind of transition to a more regenerative way of having a food system.
And I suppose, Nick, it also fits with some of I know the motivation for regenerative was also financial, but also in relation to legacy for kids, wasn't it? So that was a trigger. And you recognise it in quite a lot of farmers who are changing practices, that it is that recognition of what they're doing is impacting the next generation.
But I can remember when I was with AHD Liz, and I used to go on to arable farms and go through all their spray records and costings and stuff. And potatoes, oh my word, they are, this was a few years ago now, but they are sprayed and sprayed and sprayed. And because I do love a packet of crisps, but we are completely clueless to what's actually happened to that potato. And when I see our two daughters, one of them is particularly unhealthy. She always just makes hopeless choices. And I dread to think what she consumes in terms of the actual food, but also all the pesticides and everything she's eating with it. Just on pesticides, can you give us an example of what the pesticide then does to our gut?
Yeah, I think where we're at, we know that in our gut we have something called our gut microbiome, same as you have your soil microbiome that you want to look after in your land. And we know that when the soil soil microbiome is healthy, it helps the immunity of the plant, and and creates resistance in plants and affects their immunity. Same with human health. We have this wonderful microbiome in our gut, and it does a host of things in terms of our immunity, our ability to fight disease, stay cancer free, impacts our mood, impacts skin, impacts how we go through menopause. Like, it's it's a really vital thing. And as you know, with like glyphosate, it was initially an antibiotic, isn't it? So it kills, bacteria and fungi. So even if from a common sense point of view, our exposure to these kind of drugs will be impacting our gut microbiome, and in turn will be impacting human health. It's not just our pesticides, it will be the antibiotics that our mother had, it will be to do with other things that we're exposed to. And the gut microbiome is also about eating real food, it's about having good sleep, it's about managing our stress, like it's about having connection and being and a sense of feeling safe and managing our stress. Like that, our gut microbiome also responds to that. It's not just about chemical exposure and just about the food that we're eating. And I live in this kind of medical world where I've got people like associating with all sorts of stuff, and then people who deny that it's a problem. I think the research is emerging, and I think one of the issues is often the research just isolates certain chemicals that we're exposed to, but it doesn't look at that cocktail effect of all the things. And often the studies are very short, and you're not looking at actually what happens when we're exposed year on year, decade on decade, how to impact our epigenetics and the impact on our children. We haven't always got that data. So I think it's difficult to go, oh, this having exposure to this is going to cause that. It's not quite as direct as that yet, but data is coming out. And so I follow people like the Pesticide Action Network to sort of keep me up to date and hear what's going on in terms of the conversation. But it is a problem for human health, but it's a massive problem for nature. And we are nature, and if we're destroying nature, we're destroying our own biome, and we're destroying our own health.
I'm not justifying pesticide use necessarily, but I'm also saying there's also an impact of when it is sprayed within that crop's lifetime. So there's a difference potentially between glyphosate being sprayed on a crop to kill what was there previously before drilling versus
drying it
on a crop just before you harvest it.
Mm.
And certainly with the glyphosate is that the healthier the soil is, then it's more able to actually use it as a carbon source, so it will break it down quicker. So the challenge becomes the impact of glyphosate on poor soil health is amplified because there's no biology to break it down, but it's potentially caused the poor biology, so it becomes this loop. And the reality is that most of those, or certainly early days pesticides, were converted from nerve agents. It's moved technology from what was warfare to warfare against insects or various things. And I think within an arable context, it's one of the most challenging ones to it takes a very brave person to go, well, I'm not just going to put anything on. Anyway, we digress. But I just think it's not a simple binary, just don't use them. I think it is about how do you use it, how do you reduce the use, how do you use other techniques to try and reduce the use, and then gradually wean yourself off it. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there. Mainly because Nick and I have Nick's view of glyphosate is it should be banned. My view is it is a tool. We just have to use it we have to use it with knowledge of what could his intention be.
Well, yeah, but it's easy for me because we don't grow crops, so we don't need to use it. Whereas, I do think it might come and bite us on the bum. But it is I think it will. But I get what you say, Liz. Do get it.
And what's interesting is probably it's the pesticide that's people will remember the name of, but there's consequences of all of the various things. And it certainly was when I was doing a piece of work at the home farm, and you realise how many different chemicals was being sprayed on crops. And because it's done in several passes, but multiple chemicals are mixed together, so you don't see 20 passes with the sprayer. You might see there might be 5, but there's all of this cocktail of chemicals being sprayed on. Made me angry at the time.
But Sally, in the medical world, because in farming, it seems to me that there's ReGen, and there's organic ReGen, and then there's maybe conventional farming, and all the edges are a little bit blurred. And people are moving across to ReGen slowly, but there's a big chunk of the industry which is hardcore conventional. And is that the same in the medical world?
Yeah, I think farmers and doctors have very similar stories. We are trained to treat diseases with chemicals. That's how we're taught. And we have lost confidence that our bodies can heal, as most farmers have lost confidence that the land can heal. And that's the way we're taught. And I think there is definitely, when I started this journey back in 2011, I'd been a GP for, I'd been trained for 11 years by then, and I was a GP. And most people just thought I was bonkers asking these questions, and back then there wasn't a big movement around lifestyle medicine. There was very little talk about food as medicine. And I had to go to America to get training, actually, to really rethink the problem and think of a better approach. And partly it was sparked because I lost my own health and I didn't want to take drugs for life. And I just want to say, thank goodness for the NHS and thank goodness for medications. Like, I have a daughter that's on a life-saving drug that keeps her disease in remission, or she wouldn't be alive if she wasn't on it. And there's such a place for this. But there's a place for like specialist care. It's just the majority of the diseases that we see, cancer rate is 1 in 2, cardiovascular disease, main cause of death in this country, escalating issues around mental health and autoimmune diseases and food allergies and all of these things. And when you look at the root cause of these things, depending on the disease you look at, somewhere between 60 to 90% is to do with our individual and collective lifestyle choices. And I say collective because I'm saying that somebody's disease is their fault, because some of it is just how we are doing life as a culture, and it's the collective decisions that we're making. And so for me, when I started to understand this, it was common sense that, the root cause is lifestyle and the solution is lifestyle. And it was out of that I created this framework at looking at these foundations. And then over the last decade have, recovered my own health, but also seen many people come off medications, many people reverse diseases that I was taught you couldn't reverse. And then since then, we have seen, particularly because of the work of Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and if nobody's ever heard of him, it's really worth looking up and listening to his podcast. But he has brought lifestyle medicine and this more root cause approach, this more holistic and integrated approach to the forefront. And now GPs can go off and do diplomas in it and train in lifestyle medicine. And it's become mainstream. And certainly, I don't have a private clinic anymore. I had to close it. But when I closed my clinic, 50% of my patients were medics. It says something like the system isn't working and they're looking, for other ways, because we go into medicine to heal people, and then you suddenly realize, well, you're a pharmaceutical vending machine and you're signing prescriptions, and that helps some people and it might offer cure, but it doesn't offer healing. And so you see this, just as, farmers have this thing around ReGen and that more holistic and integrated approach. It's the same story and the same thing is happening, but you do have, same as you, staunch people who are like, oh no, it's all about the randomized control trials and the pharmaceuticals, and they have a place and they are important. And then we don't get taught anything about food, which you probably know. I mean, in our training, nothing about nutrition. We have no nutritional training.
Really?
Yeah. So in Bristol University, NutriTank is a fabulous organisation, a group of students that started asking the question and wanting to have it in part of their curriculum. They now offer teaching around to different universities around the country in response to that, but it's not mainstream. And certainly, like, I knew nothing. So I didn't get into regen farming until 2017, 18. At that point, I'd been using food as medicine, as well as those other foundations, to help people recover health. And I had no idea. I still thought the chickens were pecking in the farmyard and the cows were in the field. And I had no idea. And, you know, I was educated and, you know, as a doctor, and I was doing lifestyle medicine and food as medicine. And it was actually my brother who, over a glass of wine, started talking about natural wines and the soil microbiome. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, and everything he was talking about the soil, I was going, but this is what's happening in the gut. Like, and it started, it started this, journey into finding about how our food was produced. And I would just phone up farmers who had something like organic or regen on their website. It was actually Piper's Farms, Peter Gregg and Henry. I phoned them up and went, oh, I'm a medic doing sort of food as medicine stuff. I don't really understand how my food's grown. And he was like, just come. And from then I just went from farm to farm to farm. And what started out as like an academic exercise ended up being quite a spiritual awakening, really. And nature assaulted me and changed the way I see life, basically. Is that too fluffy for you?
Just interested in how you then doing that replication, isn't it? That is doing, you've invested a huge amount of time, energy, all of that into that proper in embedding you in that world and educating yourself. And it's just, how do we get that to a wider group of people? But it's conversation. It has to be in all the time.
Yeah, I was talking to Patrick Holden the other day. We had dinner, and you listen to his life, and you know, all of the time he's invested pioneering, speaking up, writing things. And it's only, I mean, it's in his 70s now, and only now you're kind of seeing, you know, the discussion and the narrative. You know, it takes time, it takes pioneers, and it takes people to go and fall apart and lose their health and try and find a better way. But it's going on, and it is happening. Yeah.
And I suppose the risk is that actually the new form of finance is then in supplements, isn't it? People now are making money on, like, you now walk into supermarkets and gut boosting is on so much stuff that probably wasn't there a year ago.
Yeah, and I have a real problem with that. It's real food. You have to you sometimes need supplements where you can identify deficiencies. And I think there's a place maybe when people, you know, particularly things like vitamin D, we should probably all be on, but most others, I think it's probably a bit of a waste of time. You need to be eating real food. And really, you need to be eating food grown how you're growing it, because then we're going to get the nutrition and the phytonutrients that we need for health.
But when you think of vegetables in the supermarket,
it's a problem, isn't it?
It's a problem. Because how nutritious are those vegetables? What have they got on them? Because it says wash them, but I always think, well, it's well and truly in them, whatever's been put on them anyway. And is like the horticulture industry in this country is fairly knackered. And so unless you've got, a market garden near you, or we're all buying probably quite mediocre veg from the supermarket.
Not that I'm disagreeing, but I just think we have to be cautious, because we're potentially buying substantial vegetables from a range of different sources. But the bit that's important is that there's a huge variation in where they come from, and what we don't understand is the variation. So wouldn't it be lovely that we go in with our own little monitor or meter or whatever to say, actually, the nutrient density of this broccoli is higher than that one or that one?
Which they have developed and are developing. So you can get handheld, like, oh gosh, who's the guy? I've forgotten his name, over in America. The Bionutrient Association. His name's gone out of my head, but they've designed one with that very purpose, that we'd be able to go and measure the nutrient density of the veg and be able to make a better educated choice as a consumer.
But the reality is supermarkets aren't disappearing, are they? I mean, they're a major place. Well, they're the main place where people will buy this. So it's about how you get the technology and interest going in at a supermarket level.
And it is. And I still think the argument of moving from ultra processed food to shitty vegetables is still a better choice.
Yeah. Yes.
and you know, and a good choice for people if that's what they can afford. But there's a journey to get to where we really should be, you know, in terms of getting really well grown, nutrient dense food. So.
And sorry to interrupt, but for me, I think it's more of that community. We'll come on to it. I went on a retreat and there was a lot about we've become disconnected from land, which some days I haven't been. But do you mean in part of it is the disconnection from land? But then I've been pondering this, which is about, is it a disconnection from community? So we never were in a place that everybody grew everything themselves. Do you mean there was always someone who kept pigs and someone who made the bread, and that it was about actually a collaborative approach, and that's the bit that's missing. And so it's how you get that community feel, and whether it's like Nick and I have talked about the like farm to fork events, which again I know is a narrow audience, but that's just building the community feel again around food.
Yeah, and loneliness is one of the biggest killers. We have good research that shows it's as big a driver in disease as smoking and high blood pressure and diabetes. It is profound, and food offers a solution in that. It gathers us around the table, it connects us to our growers, it connects us to our landscape, it connects us to our story and our heritage. It's such a powerful healer, not just because of what it's doing to our gut microbiome with the nutrients it's giving us. It has the potential to gather us again as people. And so, it's critical, building community. But I do think it is about landscape. I think, you know, our gut microbiome and our own biomes are connected to the soil and to our landscape. And usually that's transmitted through our food, not usually, ideally, and originally it was, now it's not. And it's that ecological sort of connection of these biomes that are impacting environmental health and our health, and they're all connected and we can't separate them out. And so it is about landscape. It is, you know, about getting our hands in the dirt and having dirty food that need washing and being exposed to the biome, because that is talking to our own body and training our own immune system, and that is broken down, and that is why we're having so many issues around gut issues and allergy issues. Well, it's part of the problem.
And do you think farmers realise their potential in the kind of answer of or how it could work? Because sometimes I feel that they defend the current system, and it does them probably a lot of harm. It does their land possibly a lot of harm. I think that farmers could be so powerful in this area, and I don't know if they realise how powerful they could be, how big a voice they could be for real food. Yeah.
So I think farmers hold the health of our nation in their hands, Lee. And I think it's about us coming together. It's about discussions of breaking down these silos at government level and local level, where actually around the table there should be, you know, your urban planner, your farmer, your doctor. Like, we should all be looking at this problem together, because they're all interrelated and they're complex. And this idea that, you know, the farmers have got to do their bit and the health have got to do it. We need collaboration and we need communication. It's like nature. Nature loves diversity and complexion and complexity and you know, that sort of integration and communication. And that's how we need to operate to find the solution. And that's one of my passions about. You know, I go along to these ReGen farming conferences and bang my drum about health, but it's just trying to be that voice. And actually this year we had some farmers come to the Integrated Personalised Medical Congress in London, and the health loved it, like having farmers on the stage and being able to ask all their questions about, you know, glyphosate and when they spray and what difference. And we need to create these forums where we can be having these discussions and think about, solving the problems at a local level and government. We need different health to be one thing. Like if we would just get together, we would just solve so many of our health issues and save a huge amount of money. Yes.
Yeah. I think, and that's becoming clear, isn't it? Which is the cheap food is having then the consequences. So we're paying for it environmentally, cleaning up water, or we're paying it from a health perspective. So it's not, it's like, it's quick and fast, isn't it? We've solved one problem, but actually we've just rippled effect, unintended consequences. It's now spiraling slightly out of control.
And you are seeing great things like in Wales, they're rolling out the project with growing carrots for their local schools, and they're all organic and ReGen grown. And that all started with, a lady with an idea in Cardiff about buying courgettes and getting them into the local school and seeing if logistically you could do it, because the logistics within health and hospitals and food is a nightmare. But she had a go and it worked. And now they're rolling it out across, different areas of Wales. And so there are people who are being brave, that's showing you can do this and you can set up a system that works, and then joins together sort of education, and it will impact health and, local farmers and local food. And there's amazing projects going on around the country at local levels, where these silos are breaking down, and health and schools and food producers are starting to have these conversations and work out solutions of how to solve the issue in their communities.
And do you think things are changing? Do you think it's speeding up the rate of change?
Again, like over the last sort of 5 years, carrying foot in both camps of, the bit in the farming and the bit in the health. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I wonder, do I end up just in echo chambers, because I've positioned myself? I would like to think that I am seeing change, and certainly in the new wave of doctors that are coming through, I get so many people contacting me going, how do we do this? Like, we want to do this. And they don't, they're asking these questions, and they realize the limitations, the value of our system. It's an important system, our health system, but the limitations of it to solve the complex problems. And so I feel hopeful. Is it quick enough? I don't know. We're all going to die at the end anyway. So the world will end. So let's not worry too much about it. But anyway, oh dear.
I think this, I agree, which is I end up with a bias sample because I speak to people who think similar to me, I suppose. But it's back to that. We just have to keep having the same conversations. It can get quite. It's like almost everybody you speak to is an opportunity for advocacy, which you end up being this sort of slightly weird person that people don't want to speak to after a while. But for me, it's such an important part of it.
And I think also one of the things that is really getting people's attention is our kids are suffering. And so you've got all of these people, however high powered they are, whatever positions of leadership, wherever they are politically, when your child, is diagnosed with various diseases, 50% of children that by the age of 18 have a medical diagnosis.
Really? My God.
I know. And so I think that, we have to break into people's hearts. Like that is, that desire to change has to come from that. And suffering often is the thing that births change, isn't it? And so sadly, we're seeing so many issues in our youth, but they've got parents who are in places of power. And so, hopefully out of that, some different decisions will be made, or at least some decent questions will be asked. I think the issue is we're just not asking the right questions often.
But David Unwin, didn't he say, Liz, on the podcast we did with him, that we are the sickest in Europe, but we're not as bad as America?
Oh no, yeah.
So why has, say, for example, France, why have they got it so much better than us? Why are we so bad at this?
I think culturally we have very different cultural relationship with food. If you look at somewhere like France, it's about family, it's about getting round the table. They educate their children a lot later. There's a whole host. They have siestas, don't they? It'd all be better if we had a siesta.
And I think they absolutely worship food, don't they? Do you mean in terms of, again, I've not necessarily experienced directly, but watched a lot of programs on it in terms of the sort of regional food, the gangs of people that then protect it, the number of sort of protected sort of food origins, can't remember the word, but do you mean they just seem to have a lot more interest in supporting local.
They definitely have a very different culture around food. Portugal, France, and you see these lower rates of chronic diseases, and it isn't just food, but that is a major part of why we are sick, and we also extremely stressed, and sleep deprived. In this country, I think on average we have 6 hours 24 minutes sleep, and anything below 7.5 hours of sleep we know has catastrophic impacts on health. So it's all of these things. Our sleep is deprived, we're overstressed, we don't eat real food, we're very disconnected as a culture, disconnected from family, disconnected from purpose, disconnected from nature. And we're also hugely sedentary. And so it's like all of the foundations that our body needs in place in order to thrive, all of them are compromised. Now, our body's amazing, and it can adapt, and it's absolutely stunning, the science. But on every area we are compromised, and therefore it's having that impact, on our human health. And so, I always say to people, if this overwhelms you, go and get a good night's sleep, go out for a walk, hold on to a loved one, eat a good meal, and do something that makes you feel good about yourself. Just keep it really simple and do that the next day. And it will impact your health and experience and enjoyment of life. We don't have to make it really complicated. And we can't all be eating real food all of the time, but we can go for a good night's sleep. We can cuddle a pet or a daughter, or we can go for a walk in this country. There's so much green space. So yes.
Some of that is then prioritizing people. Do you mean it's then the whole thing about deserving, isn't it? That people then deserve that. So then you get into a whole self-esteem issue and all of that sits alongside it, that people appear, I suppose I can talk for myself, is that it's the appearance that I need to keep working because that's what I need to do. And actually I do deserve to have a day off, or I deserve even to go and do something completely different. And so you do have to force yourself and have a chat with yourself to make sure that you achieve something that isn't just working or being busy.
Yeah.
I've stopped the phrase, I am busy. I just don't use it anymore because the more you tell yourself you're busy, the more you are busy.
Yeah. And I totally agree. Like in my 25 years of medicine, I always think with my patients, they sit in two camps. They either know that they've got value and they love themselves, or they've done some internal work and worked out their issues, or they sit in this other camp where they don't love themselves. And whatever you throw at that group in terms of what they could do to improve their life, they won't. And actually it'll be self-sabotage. And actually the root of everything we do, it is about love. It's about loving ourselves, and it's about loving others, and it's about loving the landscape. Like that is at the heart of of real change, and it brings real change. Like that external fear of I'm doing this because I don't want to get ill won't last very long, where I'm going to do this because I love myself and I'm valuable, and I want to model it to my children that we are worth resting, we're worth enjoying play, and we're worth eating good food together. So love totally is at the heart of everything we're talking about in terms of change. So we need to get farmers to fall in love with their land again, and we need to get general public to fall in love with themselves, and then we'll start making some good decisions.
I think farmers do. I think the love of the land is quite an easy one. I think it's the working, it's being busy, and not giving them themselves time off, not spending time with their families. I think that is quite often a farmer's problem. Because like growing up, Saturday and Sunday were just like work days. There wasn't. Dad didn't really think that we should. He used to say to me, "Go and ride your pony for an hour and get it out your system." God, I hope he doesn't listen to this. Yeah, but so alcohol.
Yes.
Is that really bad?
I think where we are.
There's a space.
I think where we are at the moment is hardliners would say there's no room for alcohol, that there's always a link to some cancer or another. That's me really bodging the research and quoting it. I think a healthy relationship with alcohol can be a good thing. I mean, it's very interesting when you look at blue zones, so the areas in the world where people live the longest and have the least chronic diseases, that most of them drink alcohol in some way, but it's usually social. It's usually around gathering together, celebration, sitting at the end of the day. So I do think it's how we use it. And if we use it for connection, instead of trying to disconnect from stress, but connect with others, then I think the benefit of that connection outweighs the risk. So I think it's how we use it and our relationship to it, and it can be used in a positive way.
The new mantra is, did my ancestors do it? As in eat or drink it. And generally, they probably would have drunk some. They might have brewed it.
They would have fermented honey, and they would have fermented things, and animals do it. They eat fermented food, seek out fermented foods, get a bit drunk. So, yes.
Little and often, not every day.
Well, the connection rather than disconnection, I think that really makes sense.
Reno loves a lot of connection, doesn't he, when he's drinking?
Well, he likes to get very connected with lots of lots of friends, but he loves the social crack of alcohol. He wouldn't never drink just in the house. He wouldn't drink by himself. But it's that kind of he likes the crack, and it's always a bit better with alcohol. It's an awful thing to say, but it is.
Just when it tips over. It's like anyway, one too many, perhaps. So the bit that I suppose within this cluster of podcasts we're interested in sort of thinking about how we get ReGen to scale, because like we've done a lot of chats with people who are direct selling or interested in supplying to local markets, and a bit we have a freezer and we sell it is how they normally start out. So have you seen interesting examples in other countries where farmers are working collectively, or where they are sort of not just direct selling locally, but are sort of joining forces and making an impact?
I don't think I can answer that question very well.
There isn't many examples, I think, is the answer. Certainly within the UK, there's not that many.
I mean, one of my roles recently was my family have got a restaurant. We've got a couple of restaurants, and one of them we set up recently. I spent a year trying to get the supply chain right, where we really connected with our farmers and local food producers, and it was a nightmare. The logistics is a nightmare. So we meet amazing growers and food producers, and then the logistics of I can get you grain, but then I've got to send it to Wales to go and get it down to then bring it back here, and then what are the miles of that? And I can buy a cow, but I can't take a whole cow, and so it was really, really challenging. So it wasn't the lack of finding the growers and the food producers, it was the logistics for a business. And but saying that, we did manage it, and we got our Michelin star actually recently.
So, well done.
So and there are, certainly in that industry, there are restaurants looking to do that, and they are overcoming some of the challenges. So and it's just a small example from my world, not my health world, but the foodie world, where people are looking to find better systems.
And to do a blatant plug, where is the restaurant?
So it's Hampton Manor. So it's near Birmingham, in Hampton in Arden. Yes. Grapes and Savour. Yes.
Because I was listening to on Instagram, she's called Chef Molly. She was she ran quite a lot of vegan restaurants in California, then had an epiphany and has moved them into regenerative type produce. So she's now serving meat, but as long as it's produced from a regenerative farm. And it was quite interesting listening to the podcast. It's about, because it is about wholesalers. Do you mean we as farmers, we're slightly divorced from that importance of that wholesaler that is that middle person, isn't it? They are holding some supply and distributing it. So it's how we then get, I suppose, more educated within how does the actual supply chain work.
Yes, no, it really is, because there was plenty of intention and plenty of people doing great stuff. It was literally the logistics of getting it to the restaurant. It was hard.
Because I suppose her point was they spent a lot of time finding the producers and then sort of gifted them to the wholesalers. So they, like, everybody can now access, or there's now an order list that you can access lots of different people. But for one, so I think there was a story where she had to order 2 pallet loads of chicken and like buy a freezer because there was no means of getting 10 chickens a week. You had to commit to buying the whole batch.
Yeah. Yes. So part of that, we found a sort of wholesaler where they would work with certain growers and deliver with their normal systems. So that really helped. And we're looking as a business to transition to taking whole, eating nose to tail and taking whole animals, because we think that's the best thing to do. But for us, it's the space to have the animal, to butcher the animal, then looking at because we have 2 restaurants, we have a hotel, and it's looking at how do we use that whole animal, and so we see it as a 5-year project really to be able to get to that place, and that's just us as a business trying to make it work. And then we can really easily find beautifully pasture fed beef, and then we could take the whole animal, and then it's a win-win on both sides. But it is taking a lot of thought and investment on our side. So there is lots of thinking to do around that logistical piece and that wholesaler piece. And so for
with less, the abattoirs, it's your location related to an abattoir, all that kind of thing. It's not easy, I don't think.
It isn't, but it is possible.
I know. Well, I was delivering eggs the other day to a very nice restaurant near Penrith, and then just went in the kitchen and there was a big sack of Wild Farms flour, and so I thought, God, it is happening.
Yeah, Andy Cato's project there is great. Yes, it is happening, and people are pioneering things and showing it can be done, and then it gets easier for other people. So
I do think flour, do you mean it's also a really, really interesting place to start, because it is very I know once it's milled, maybe not, but as grain, it's durable. It's just a lot more challenging with livestock products. But I'm not saying it's just more challenging to get that carcass balance, the seasonal supply, all of that. It's intriguing. But I don't know why we can't freeze more stuff, but I suppose we do.
Yeah, I think we do. I think there is a shift in restaurateurs' understanding around that. So fish, we only take fish from boats 10 foot and under, but we've had discussions with our fish supplier, and we, there are things that we take frozen because we understand it's just as fresh, and sometimes it's changing mindsets of chefs. But certainly nutritionally, frozen fruit and veggies are a good option. Often they're frozen on site. It keeps that vitamin C stable, so it's not deteriorating as it's traveling. And so, I don't think people should be turning their nose up at frozen veg and stuff. And the same with meat. But
yeah, it's interesting because we do direct sell a little bit, and we. There's a slight preference for fresh, but then generally most people then put it in their freezer.
It's bonkers, isn't it? It's mindsets, isn't it?
So we're getting over some of that, but certainly at the beginning, the ambition was to do more fresh stuff, but it just is logistically easier to be able to freeze it and then supply it out. Slight segue, because I mentioned in the introduction in terms of you plan retreats. So with Nick's new barn coming on, we've decided we're going to go in the retreat line. So where should we start? We haven't got a wild. We can swim in a stream.
No, well, we have got an old reservoir that at some point will be a wild swimming place. The fact that I hate swimming and I'm awful at it is beside the point. Reno can swim.
Or just set up an IBC as a plunge pool. We'll be fine.
So what are you asking? You're asking what facilities or how?
Well, no, I think when you talk, as I see it, Liz, because she's only told me this today that we're having a retreat.
I told you the other day before I went on the retreat. Now I know. It's fine.
So we're quite well down the kind of ReGen line with cattle and laying hens and a few pigs, and we've got quite a wild, rugged landscape. So in my mind, so when you said you worked with corporates, so there's obviously the farmers. We've got a farmer meeting here on Friday. So there's bringing farmers around, but also the corporates and then school kids. And it's getting a load of kind of people who spend all their lives suited and booted, really, to get down and dirty. That sounds wrong, but to get kind of dirt under their nails on a farm. They can collect the eggs, they can move the cows, and then use our meeting room as a kind of place to chew things over and eat great food. Liz, if I missed anything out you do on a retreat, because I've never been on one.
Well, we did.
That's where we need to start then. We'll get you on retreats.
We all ended up coming home with a massive oak log that's inoculated with mushrooms that potentially I can't eat because 10% of the population, it basically makes you go funny. And in a year's time, I might have some mushrooms. I loved it. So it's a lot of it is just, and some of it's about experience. Some of it is just being in a wood. What was powerful about where I went was the eating in the wood. Like having a long table set up in the wood, and you just realise it's such a simple idea but really powerful because nobody does it anymore unless you're in.
No, but it's a bit wet and windy up here generally.
It doesn't, not maybe always, but like on a special occasion.
Yeah.
So I was so motivated that I'm trying to convince my sister to set about a new bit of wood with a chainsaw so we can have our new clearing to set up and then do like steak nights in the wood.
So, Liz, you won't like this question, but what did you get from the retreat? Be fluffy.
Possibly some infectious diseases from the lake. But what did I get? I enjoyed the range of things that we did. The place was amazing. So it's 42 acres down in Somerset. They have accidentally got beavers, so they haven't ever released them, and they have sort of moved in. So what was the most amazing thing, which is I've spent however long in the countryside and I've never walked in a landscape that's been affected by beavers. So there's dams, there's a lodge, there's tracks, and all of they've changed how that water level is within that landscape. And it's just amazing. To me, it's the idea of seeing something I've never seen before, even though it's in the UK. So that was quite cool. And then there was a really interesting group of people because it was more rewilding type, or like a wilding type. It was just really interesting people from a range of different places. So who like nature, like food. And so you just had some really useful chats.
And what did your dad say? Did you tell him where you were going?
Yeah, because they had to look after my dog. So I had to negotiate payment for that. So you had a dog-free weekend as well. That was an advantage. But and for me, it's that sort of, I suppose it's back to that previous point, which is it was a weekend where I didn't write anything down. I didn't plan anything. I know I followed someone else's plan, but it was an opportunity for me to actually disappear from what my responsibilities.
And was it restorative?
I think so. Yeah, because it's made, and what restorative to me is when I've got ideas. So loads of ideas came from it. So my brain was in like a relaxed state. So ideas came. And it was very funny at times as well. So there was a lot of laughter, which is always good and not always full of.
And I've spoken to you 3 times this week, and I can tell you're in a good place.
Yeah, and it was fun. I only slept for 3.5 hours last night, but other than that, I'm fine. And I think I suppose the question is, would I go again? Probably. But it's also an interesting experience to go to different places, isn't it? It's an opportunity to go somewhere else. And I've been on a few more yoga-y ones, and I quite like this being focused on nature, food, farming type stuff. And also because I was the only real, there was another farm owner, but I was the only farmer. So also I also like being asked questions. So I was like the novelty.
Like a superstar.
I was the another thing sort of person. So yeah, and it was just a good mix.
But yeah. Sally, do you run these retreats?
Yes.
And how often and where? And
so I haven't worked much over the last year because I've had a really poorly daughter. So I'm literally just picking up work again and getting back into that world. So my focus has been home this year. So back in the NHS next month, and we'll start back in doing retreats again. So I do it with Hampton Manor. I've run my own. They're really hard to sell. So doing it this way is I just provide a service for Hampton Manor's clients, and I do it in Hampton Manor and try and make them really playful, engaging, and just making it fun and relaxing. So, and I think there is, I think people are looking to take their teams away just to rest and be in a different environment. And so there is a place for these more sort of wilder retreats where people just get out of the city and into nature. And I think you just have to be your authentic self. You have to work out who you are and what you offer, and that process of putting that out there and is like marketing any product, isn't it? Whether it's your beef or a spa, it's that whole process of getting it to the people who might be interested, and I always find the tricky bit. I don't like that bit. I just want to deliver them. I don't want to be selling anything.
I think we completely underestimate how much people don't spend outside. And so for me, it's most of the time. And so then you speak to people and they're like, but we haven't, like I haven't seen this sort of view for months. And that was what was useful, is that realization that actually how fortunate we are.
Yes. Yeah, no, definitely. And even just permission to be away from phones and off screens. And I'm always surprised when people come and just basic stuff. And getting them outside. I always look at their trainers and think, oh, they're not going to stay for very long.
There was a brief moment when we were meant to be doing beaver meditation. Importantly, we were waiting to spot the beavers, and unfortunately the butcher rang, so I had to sort of not ring, but by message had to negotiate what the next order would look like. So I was trying to be meditative, but I was sorting out.
I didn't say that you were meditating on your beaver.
Not this. So yeah,
butcher. No.
But yeah, it was definitely a butcher query. Anyway, different lives. Nick, you want to ask anything about the menopause? You started it with menopause, and I feel like we haven't talked any.
No, I think I'm in quite a good place with it in the moment. But it's funny because I've got lots of sisters, and some of them, the younger ones, are like, think I'm going around the twist, and every time I mention it, but I say, your time will come. But I think we're just lucky in this current time that it's out there and it's talked about.
Yes.
Because even, I don't know, I don't even know when it happened to my mum. I mean, she just like quietly scurried through it, I'm sure. But I think I'm quite open, and I think it's always good to share. Sometimes I overshare, but it's, yeah. And my head, sometimes it just goes completely blank and I just don't know. Well, I haven't got a clue. Just lose completely train of thought.
Yeah, and it's really important to keep talking about it because the highest suicide rate for women is this period. Like, it is a serious thing. Like, people think they're going mad and they despair of life, and it is just a transition in their hormones, and there is help. So and if people listen to this and think that's me, then Louise Newson has lots of great stuff online, great information. If you're not getting support from your GP, just equip yourself with her booklets and go and see a sympathetic GP. There is help and there is medication should you choose that, like bioidentical hormones, relatively safe for most people during that period, and they can be a real lifesaver, literally, for women, as well as really improve symptoms and improve outcomes for later in life too. Or if you don't want to do medication, there are, and you feel well enough and able to make the choices, there are lifestyle things that you can do as well, which does come down to eating real food, being careful with alcohol. Caffeine can make things a bit worse. Making sure that you're really tackling stress, because stress becomes a lot more difficult to navigate during those years. So you need lots of new resources of how to do that. Making sure you've got good friendships to walk through it with, and but you're not alone.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good time to have the menopause now, isn't it? Even 10 years ago. So
absolutely, yes, definitely a lot more support, a lot more knowledge, a lot more access to help. And I think it is a lot more challenging than previous generations for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I think it's just like the similar to my experience of my mum going through a menopause, which is the only thing I knew was when she was coming off HRT and had her bone strength measured. So it's just, there's like a stoicism that at least now there's awareness building.
Yeah. And also that it can start in your early 40s, so a lot of women don't realise that they're starting, they just think they're getting anxious, and it can be that drop in hormones with their progesterone. And so just that awareness now that it's over a period of time, it's not your period suddenly stops at 51 and you have a hot flush.
But the trouble is that menopause often coincides with teenage kids.
Yeah, I have 3 teenage girls.
Yeah.
I know, bonkers. Oh, yeah.
And that's why Renna's gone to play squash to just get the hell out of me.
There must be an evolutionary reason, timing-wise.
Yeah, because we would have had our babies earlier. We would have had our babies 15 to 20. We're now having them 25 to 30. It's a catastrophe. So, yes, they would have all fled the nest for us to then fall apart quietly without anybody seeing.
Thank you for listening to the ReGen Ag podcast. Huge thanks to our sponsor Tim Nicholson from Cactus Tree Guards, Reno for the music, and Pete Ord, the podcast wizard from the studio at Sunbeams, part of the Annie Mawson Sunbeams Music Trust. See you next time.